right. It looks like we are. Yeah, we're live. I can still hear you. You can still hear me. Good to go. I'm gonna bring up my Twitter feed because boy, do I have some goodies in there. And I'm also going to bring up my Foundation of Society chat because I actually got a couple of good suggestions for questions from Danny Duran. 1 second. All right, we got 1 minute on. Oh, nope. There you go. It is 3 o'clock on the nose, 8 o'clock on the nose, your time. And we are live here on Dangerous Space live stream with my man, Nick Buckley. Nick, thanks for coming on with me, man.
You're welcome. Thank you for the invitation again.
Let's see. Let's look at my notes here. I think maybe the first thing, it's been a while since you and I talked on a podcast. Maybe the first thing to do is to talk about, your background. What is, I came to know you because early on, this is maybe like 3 years ago, I'm thinking, you were one of the first people to call out Black Lives Matter. And you got a lot of stick for it. But at the time you were running a charity called Mancunian Way. So maybe we start with that. Like what's been your main effort in terms of community organization, your charity? What's your background in that sense?
Yeah, sure. So it was I think that was about 2 years ago when me and you first chatted. My background is nothing special. So just a kid off a council estate, single parent household, no male role models in my life, went to a failing school, drifted through my teens and my 20s, didn't know what I was doing, took state handouts nearly all the time, was just a lost male, which is quite common in our societies at the moment. And then in my 30s, I got my first proper job, excelled, enjoyed it, then got a job with the local council, and that changed into working with kids to stop them getting involved in crime and antisocial behaviour. And I excelled at that. And then we had big cuts in the UK in 2011 because of the financial crash. National government started cutting all the funding to local government, and my job and my team's job working with kids all stopped. So I took redundancy and used that money to set a charity up to carry on that same work, but to do it better than I was allowed to do it at the council. Because like all government agencies, you have your hands tied, you've got red tape, there's things you can't do. Where I set a charity up to do it my way, not their way, not the right way, not the wrong way, but my way. And I will take the credit if it goes right, and I will take the criticism if it goes wrong. And 10 years later, it's a multi-award winning charity now that have saved and improved thousands of lives across Greater Manchester.
Now, this charity, at least a good portion of your work with Mancunian Way, correct me if I'm wrong, involved you actually going out into the streets and talking with and counseling young people who were losing their way, who were living rough on the streets, involved negatively with the law, involved with drugs, what have you. Is that a fair assessment of what you did? Much of what you did with Mancunian Way?
No, that's absolutely spot on, and that's still what the charity does now.
Okay.
So the charity was all about working on the streets with the kids and young people who nobody else was working with because they weren't going to the youth centres, they weren't engaging other mainstream agencies, they were lost, and they were purposely avoiding working with anybody, but they were hanging out on street corners and in parks. And my project was all about Why don't we take services directly to them? Instead of making them think they have to turn up for appointments to get help and support, why don't we take those services directly to them? Because they're the people and the young people who are in most of need of some quality help and support. And that's what the project started off doing, and that's what we're still doing now.
Now, the first, I guess the very first question, maybe I'm taking a little bit of a detour, but I think I might as well. Someone, your views and mine, your political views and mine overlap in a lot of ways. And I saw firsthand today when I announced that I was going to be doing this live stream with you. On my Twitter feed, I got some stick back from a couple people. So I'm going to get right into it because that's what we do. So it was Sarah Wolf. Her Twitter ID is Sarah, Sara Wolf, WOLFEBAH. And her question was, she wanted me to talk about your quote, misogynistic and borderline racist POV. So I guess my first question to you would be, when you were talking to young people on the streets, on the wrong side of the law, living rough, homeless, what have you, destitute, did you ever refuse to help anyone on the basis of their sex?
I've never refused to help anybody. So even though the charity is about working with young people, if you were 72 and you walked up to us on those streets and you had a problem that had nothing to do with us, you had a housing problem, you had a social benefit problem, we would help you. We help people who are there, who are in need. And that's always been the case.
Okay, so it doesn't sound like you're very.
Let me clarify a bit more. I know Sarah personally. Me and Sarah sat next to each other for a year when we both worked for local government. So she knows me, I would say very, very well. We disagree politically, but Sarah is one of those middle-aged, divorced, lonely women who have made all the wrong choices because they believed in feminism and they thought feminism were going to make them happy. And because their husbands and, because their relationships are broken down and they're now on their own, she's now looking for someone to blame for the quality of her life. And it can't be the fact that we've made poor decisions ourselves. So it must be someone else's decision. And because I'm constantly talking about personal responsibility, she takes that as a slight that I'm blaming her. And it's a shame because I've not met her now in 10 years, but she was a lovely person. She probably still is a lovely person.
This is interesting to me because, I'm asking these questions mostly for the benefit of people who don't know about you and who haven't listened to us do our thing before. But, you're not very good at misogyny. Clearly, it's like you're not very good at discriminating against women. If you're telling me that you provided services to people, regardless.
Let me tell you some of the outcomes I've got for women. So at this moment in time, I've personally saved over a dozen girls from being sexually exploited and raped. So that's over a dozen. I've also stopped the physical abuse of another half a dozen girls being beaten by their parents. One girl was being beaten by whips and sticks. When she showed me her back, she had open scars, weeping wounds where her parents were beating her when she was getting poor grades in school. I've set up projects to develop young girls so they can be the leaders of tomorrow. I've taken girls to Parliament in London so they can meet their MPs, so they can be inspired, so they can be leaders, so they can be MPs, so they can run their own businesses. I've run clubs just for girls. I remember one club, we called it Shimmer and Shine. It was all about makeup and beauty. That was to get them through the door. But when they came through the door, The project was really about empowerment. It was about careers. It was about domestic violence. So for anybody who accuses me of misogyny, the first question I always ask them is, what have you done more than I've done to improve the lives of females in this country? Because if you've done more than me, I will listen to you. But the odds are you've done nothing.
I think part of the problem here, Nick, is that the kinds of girls you're talking about who are in danger of being sex trafficked and so on are not really the right kind of girls. You see, I've been following the UK politics for a while, and I've noticed that you all had a particular problem with young girls being traded like chattels and being pictures being traded back and forth openly on social media and on people's cell phones, as if there was no police interest and no police surveillance for years up and down your country. And
We
everyone
still
who
do now. We still do today.
exactly, and everyone knows the names of the towns. You're talking about Luton. You're talking about Oxfordshire. You're talking about Rotherham. You're talking about Telford. You're talking about Rochdale. Everybody knows these names. Who cares to know? But what's interesting to me is that a lot of these people get up on their hind legs and talk of that feminism nonsense. But when you ask them what happened in Luton, they don't know. And when you ask them what happened in Telford and Rochdale and places like that, they don't know. And then when you ask them why, I mean, you can't even get their baseline ignorance down far enough to engage the question of why it was happening in the first place and why no one cared why it was happening in the first place. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, there's two reasons why feminists don't care about these girls. The first reason is the perpetrators of these crimes are the majority are Muslim men. So they're brown and they've got a different religion. So feminists straight away go, oh, I don't want to be called a racist. I don't want to be called an Islamophobe. We have such thing as the oppression Olympics, and brown people score higher than white people. Muslims score higher than Christians. I don't want to get involved in it. These perpetrators are not the type of people I want to attack. And the second reason is the victims. The victims are poor, white, working class girls.
Yes, sir.
They're not feminists. They're never going to be feminists. Correct. So therefore, these girls are unworthy of feminists sticking up for them. And that's how we know, that's how I know feminism is a crock, is a con, is a grift.
Exactly.
Because I judge movements by what they achieve, not by what they say.
Correct.
And because feminists never do anything for the industrial rape of white poor girls.
There you go.
That says something. It's a bit like BLM, Black Lives Matter. I judge them by their actions. And their actions were, let's burn down black-owned businesses in black neighborhoods.
Thank you. And by the way, this is something, right? Yeah. No, I don't want to cut you off, but it's like, this is something, and we're going to get into this in a second, because it's the other knock I hear against Nick Buckley. Well, Nick Buckley's a racist. So we're going to get to that, because again, you were one of the people early on who went right to the core of BLM, and you didn't just call them out. You didn't just call them out for being Marxist, and so because anyone could look at their kind of their overall thing and see that they had Marxist leanings or Maoist or whatever you want to call it. But you specific, and the thing that I thought was so interesting and drew my interest to you was that you specifically called them out for being anti-family. Because you see, a lot of people don't get the fact that you know, these problems, you and I can both look at actual street level problems in your country and in mine, and understand that at the root of all these problems is the destruction of the family.
Yeah.
But there's not a lot of people, even in the professional political class, even in the people who call themselves conservative politicians in your country and mine, not a lot of those people want to talk directly to that thing of the destruction of the family. Because if you start to talk about destruction of the family, and you want to follow that all the way down, then you have to talk about feminism. You have to talk about things like no-fault divorce. You have to talk about the war against religious belief and the war against the family and the war against men and what have you. And you can talk about all kind of uncomfortable things that people don't want to talk about. What they'd rather talk about, what they'd rather say is so-and-so's a racist, so-and-so's a misogynist. So whenever I see people throwing the IST around,
yeah,
my ears perk right up. And especially, a lot of people, they see me on Twitter. They don't necessarily know I'm Black. They don't necessarily, they may intuit that I'm an American. But, when I see the so-and-so's a racist thing, I get a smile on my face. And it's like, okay, we're going to do this right here. Now I want to go back to your work with Mancunian Way. Again, dealing with young people, street level work. You weren't riding a desk. You were walking the streets. In some cases, I believe you did ride-arounds with the police or took public transportation, but you were basically at the tip of the spear, right where the problem was, in the street. Now, our friend Sarah Wolf from Twitter also asked me to take you on about your racist, your borderline racist beliefs. Did you ever refuse to help anyone on the basis of their skin color when you were working with Mancunian Way?
No, obviously not.
There you go. So the reason I suspect you're racist is because you don't like Black Lives Matter. The funny thing is, I've worn a black skin my whole life, and I can't stand Black Lives Matter because both you and I see the same thing. I'm going to let you run with that.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, the fact you don't like Black Lives Matter means you're a racist as well. and what's happened over the last few years is it is now possible for Black people to be racist against Black people. That is now universally accepted to be a thing.
That's right.
Even Joe Biden, even your president, before he was president, said, if Black people, if you don't support me, then you're not really Black. How condescending is that? But that's where we've got to, because all people want to do now is have low resolution thoughts. They want to look at thumbnails. So I can look at that thumbnail and that explains everything I need to know. Well, a thumbnail explains nothing. You need to open up that page and you need to read the 84 pages that it contains to get that information for you to make a decision. But no one's prepared to do that because we've become lazy and we're becoming stupid. But all we want to see is a headline because it makes us feel clever if we can repeat that headline.
That's right.
And there isn't a problem that we have in society that can be explained with a headline because it takes nuance.
That's exactly correct. This takes me back to something that we're always talking about in the Foundationist Society. I'm going to give a shout out to my man, Danny Duran, and the Infinite Jigsaw podcast, which he runs. We did a 10-part series on the Foundationist Manifesto. The Foundationist Society is something I founded. And that 10-point manifesto is a manifesto that, like your work and like the things I hear you say, is focused primarily on internal matters, right? In other words, I can't reach out my hand and change the lowest marginal or the highest marginal tax rate in my country, and you can't reach out your hand and fix your country's broken foreign policy or its broken domestic policy or its broken energy policy. But what we can do, for example, as per our manifestos, we can see deeply, and what you just said points up that idea that we have to see things deeply. A headline is just meant to catch your attention, but it's your job to direct your attention. You see what I'm saying? And that's not the same thing. Once your attention is caught by something, you then have to use your attention as an instrument, and not as any kind of a blunt instrument either. And that's kind of what I'm seeing, is that all these people want to talk about this and that and what have. It's not. And you and I both know racism is obviously real. Sexism is obviously real. Okay, but this tactic of using information as a blunt instrument is a problem. It's good for, and you mentioned resolution, it's good for low resolution problems, right? If you ancient man in the forests, would get a sense that there was something chasing him, and his nervous system would bash him one in the head to get his attention, to say, "Run, dummy." Okay. But these kind of things that, helping people, actually helping people, that's precision work. You can't use any kind of a low resolution view when you're doing precision work.
No, absolutely. And, if you're trying to help people, people are complicated. We have no idea why people do the things they do.
Yes, sir.
People surprise us all the time. Even, scientists will invent a new thing or invent a new technology, and they think they know how we're going to use it or what we're going to do. And then they discover we had no idea people were going to do those things with it.
Yes,
because we are an enigma wrapped up in a puzzle surrounded by a mystery we don't know. And to understand the human race takes nuance. We have to dig deep, and we're always learning. But the people who react to headlines and repeat headlines, the reason why the most of them do it is because they think it makes them sound clever, because they don't understand the topic themselves. And if they've got a 5-word headline they can repeat that someone else created, it makes them sound as if they know what they're talking about. But the vast majority of the time, when I ask a follow-up question to them, the blank stares are tremendous, because apart from that one statement, they can't say anything else.
That's correct. That's correct. And this brings me to another thing. You're always talking about doing the work. You're always talking about confronting the difficult things in your life. And from what I know about you and your work in Mancunian Way, that's always been your focus, is that, someone can help you materially. Someone can give you $5 or, 5 pounds or whatever, if you're down in your luck. But to get to the root, the foundation of what's wrong, is always going to require work. If it doesn't require work, it is almost certainly useless. Now, it strikes me that another problem with the people who are kind of, waging wars of headlines and again, using attention as a blunt instrument, is that, thinking, one thing I'm always saying is that thinking for yourself is hard work, and it's dangerous, right? Because once if you think for yourself, then you might actually come to a conclusion. And then once you do, that's your conclusion. You own that. That's yours. You came to it. And then having come to a conclusion, you might turn around and actually do something in the world. And whatever comes from that act in the world is your responsibility. That's you. You have to carry that. And you see, I think most people are not ready for that.
No. I mean, when I think, and I deeply think over certain issues, it's usually depressing. Yes. And it's usually depressing because I always come to the same conclusion, which is I'm not good enough. I am too lazy. I've messed up too many opportunities. I took for granted the things that were given to me, and I didn't use them to my own advantage. Because when you think deeply and you look at your life, you always realize you let yourself down. No matter who you are, yes, you always could have done more. And that's the person we should be challenging and we should be fighting against all the time. It's ourselves. It's never your next door neighbor keeping you down. It's not the government keeping you down. It's not a different race, a different religion of people keeping you down. It's always you are keeping yourself down. And it's really depressing when you realize that, because you then realize my life could have been better if I would have been better. And even though it's upsetting, it's the truth will set you free. Yes. And the sooner you learn that lesson, that the person keeping you away from success is you, the sooner you can start tackling you, and the sooner you can start moving down that path to a success that you want. But it's a lot easier for people to always blame someone else. I mean, sometimes in our world at the moment, there's people who are living in countries where do you know what? It really isn't their fault that they're not successful. If you're living in one of the top 10 poorest countries in the world, you could be born and you could be a genius, and you could have all the energy and all the self-will you'd ever want. But if the infrastructure's not there, and if the education's not there, and if the opportunities are not there, a good part of your life is just trying to move up one step of the ladder. But if you're born in a Western country today, there is really no excuse why you're not successful. And that doesn't mean to be a brain surgeon or to be a multimillionaire. Success is what you deem success is. But in the West, in my country, there really is no excuse if you don't think you're successful. It's because you didn't work hard enough, you didn't understand the rules quick enough, and you always blame somebody else. That's not to say it's not easy. That's not to say it's easy. It's
Right.
not. It requires hard work. But in the Western world now, there's no more excuses.
There's really this is exactly right, and thinking about it, and we're really coming up fast on that other hot topic, BLM, and then we're going to get to some contemporary politics and culture stuff, and of course your upcoming book, The Making of a Beggar. This is the other thing about really choosing to see things deeply, is that the first thing you have to choose to see deeply, or the things you must choose to see deeply first, are internal things. That's the thing. And then that's the hardest thing to look at, is yourself, especially when you're walking around thinking you cut a fine figure. You're like, man, I'm good. But as soon as you really start to look at what you could be doing better, you will always find a way in which you fall short. I think George Orwell, who your countryman, one of my favorites, said that every honest biography should read like a series of defeats, because that's how you really see your life, if you look at it from within honestly, as a series of defeats. Maybe an occasional victory.
Yeah.
And I think that's this is a really important thing for people to get, because especially now there's all these, because I think we have systematically taken apart the many of the foundations of kind of civic love, like men's societies, women's societies, the rooted concept of tribe. I'm not talking about shallow tribalism just based on skin color, some bullshit like that. I mean real tribe. I'm a Kentishman. I'm from here. I'm from there. We've taken apart so many of these things, and so the result is that the people in our societies, yours and mine, coalesce around these things that are very shallow, and they coalesce around these causes that involve grand plans for action. We are going to fix the Earth's climate. And this goes back to, and the problem with this goes back to something I've heard you say again and again, which is, well, hang on a second. What do you know how to do in your life? Yeah. In other words, if you can't fix your relationship with your uncle who voted for the wrong, who you don't like him because he's a Tory, or because he's Labour, or because he's whatever, or because he voted Leave, or because he voted Remain, right? If you can't fix your relationship with your people, how the hell are you going to fix the planet? How are you going to fix racism? People say that we want to fix race. You want to cleanse the human heart of moral error, but you can't even smoke a peace pipe with your family. How are you going to do that? And so I wanted to follow up with you with something, again, to get you to talk more about this kind of thing, because there was something you said last time we talked that really struck me. You were talking about a young man, I believe, who you'd been working with, when you were doing the Mancunian way thing. And he said, there's something he said, like how the police were picking on him, but he was actually running around doing burglaries or something. You explain it better than I can, but it just struck me because he was like, yeah, the police just don't like me, or they're just bothering me. But then it's like, well, are you doing something? What's happening? Can you talk about that, please?
Yeah, that was a young black man in his teens. and we got chatting to him, talking to him, and he said his main problem where he lived in Greater Manchester was the racist police, because they're always stopping him and searching him. And I said, well, what happens then? He went, they'll arrest me. Oh, they arrest you for nothing? Oh no, they arrest me because I had cannabis on me, I was selling it. So it was like, my question then was, so they weren't hassling you because you were black, they're hassling you because they know you're a drug dealer.
Right.
And his answer was, well, sort of, but they never would have found it if I wasn't black. It was like, don't be stupid. You're now reaching for excuses for your own poor choices and behavior.
Correct.
And I understand why people do this, because how wonderful is it to feel that you don't make poor decisions?
Yeah, it's not on you, right? It's great.
Yeah, it's not on me. It's the police's fault for picking on me. That's the only reason why I got arrested, because they're picking on me. And what a wonderful childish way to live your life, that it's never your fault and never your responsibility.
Correct.
And then talking about, you were saying then about people wanting to fix the world's climate and this and that and fix racism. Well, the reason why they pick those absolutely gigantic issues to try to fix is because they know, and everyone around them knows, there's not a chance in hell they're going to fix it.
Right.
So therefore, I really don't have to try to fix it, do I? Because no one's expecting anything of me.
Right.
But if I picked a much more doable task, such as the street where I live is full of litter and graffiti, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my neighbours together. We're going to clean the street and get rid of the graffiti. And then we're going to police the street ourselves to make sure the young people understand that they need to respect where they live.
Right.
Well, they're not going to do that because that requires action.
That's right. That's right.
So it's easier to pick something that no one ever expects you to achieve.
That's exactly. And not just that, but there are clear metrics. Like you can measure the outcome, in other words.
Yes.
You see?
Yeah.
Because if y'all say, we're going to clean the street, then it's like when I walk out my house, like the street's supposed to be clean. You know, and there's no redefining the street identifies as clean, but it's really, it's got to be clean. And people can see the outcome of what you've done, as opposed to if you say, well, you can always say, well, I'm a climate activist. And then because the earth is going to burn in 5 years, and then 6 years come and it's like, well, the earth isn't burning. But imagine that's because we had such a great effect. You know, you can always assign some phantom success to what you did, and you never get you're never on the hook for that.
And there's always other people you can blame. You can say,
yes, sir.
It's China. China's the polluter. India, or we're fighting against the multinationals and the World Economic Forum and the Illuminati. They're stopping us. There's always other people you can blame for that. But when it's your street, I honestly believe the Illuminati are not having meetings to keep your street dirty. So therefore, there really is no excuse for you not doing that. That's why they never pick small, doable tasks.
Small, doable tasks, exactly. And this is the thing. And I have a lot of friends, a lot of people in my circle, and your circles and mine overlap to some extent. And we're on side about the real problems of the WEF and what they're doing, in like in Holland, for example, and the troubles of Dutch farmers and Canadian truckers and so on and so forth. But the fact is, it always comes down to people at street level looking at each other and saying, okay, let's get a game plan together for something we can do today, tomorrow, next week, next month.
Yeah.
And the moment you get into this thing where you want to tell me about something that, well, no, read this 500-page PDF about how the Rothschilds did this back in this year. And look, I'm a big history geek, but, if we are in a crisis, then what we have to do is to get a game plan together now, and we have to execute now. And this is a thing that I find, it's in other words, it's not just, lefties have certainly industrialized that kind of grievance-based politics, but they're not. But they haven't monopolized it because people on our side tend to do the same thing. They just tend to do it against enemies that maybe we can agree on, but we don't agree on this whole what they call black pilling. The idea that it's all useless. And the reason I'm going on about this is because I'm looking at something else in my Twitter feed, because I'm calling people out today, man. Let's see. Who was it now? Who started chirping up when I said I was doing a live chat with you? Some boy started chirping up. Oh yeah, my man Keegan, K Butcher Baker on Twitter. Yes, my man. So apparently K Butcher Baker implied that you're not worth talking to, because his question was, didn't Nick Buckley get like only 115 votes to be mayor of Manchester? And I was sure that it was more than 115. I don't want to get into the numbers. My initial, as soon as I read that, the first thing I thought wasn't what I actually typed, but what I thought was, well, first of all, that's more than you got. That's more than I got, because I never ran for anything. No, and there's a lot of the same people who say, oh, you only got this, you're a joke because this and that. It's like, but you see, but this dude actually got up in the morning and did something. He executed on a game plan. You know?
I mean, when I stood for mayor, I got 19,000 votes.
19,000, right?
Yeah, 19,000. Which on the whole grand scheme of things was a pittance. It was nothing. So, it sounds a lot, but it really wasn't in the grand scheme of things.
Yes, sir.
But do you know what? For me, it doesn't matter, because what I was trying to do was say to the people of Greater Manchester, this is what I believe in, this is what I'm going to do. And if you want the same vision as me, then I'm giving you this option to vote for me. And what the people of Greater Manchester said was, no, thank you, Nick. We want more of the status quo. And that's not wrong of them. That's their democratic vote and opinion to pick the best person for the job. And it turns out at that moment in time, they didn't think I was the best person for the job. That's not a slight on me. I don't think it's a slight. That's us giving them the choice and them making their own choice. And let's say I got 7 votes in that election. I would feel the same, as in I'm putting myself forward as an option, but it's always down to the people. And I'm a big believer that the people never make the wrong decision. So whoever they vote for, whoever wins, is the right candidate at that moment in time. And the people who tend to criticize me when I don't win an election, because I've never won one yet, the people who criticize me are the people who have never stood themselves. The people who have never said, I have a vision for where I want to live. This is my vision. Vote for me or don't vote for me. It's easy being a critic. It's easy to tear things down and pull things down. It's so hard to build something, to create something from scratch.
Yes, sir.
And I don't even say I'm right. All I say to people is, I think I'm right. This is what I want to do because of these reasons. And you know what? Vote for me or don't vote for me. It's your decision, and I will respect your decision. But all I want to do is give you an option.
Right. And this brings me to another thing. It's so interesting in a lot of ways. My country, the political system in my country. Well, of course, I think it's better because I'm biased. But
of course,
I think
there's nothing wrong in you thinking that.
Right. But I think it in some ways it's obviously much more rambunctious and kind of disruptive than your political system, and that's good in some ways. But ironically, the one place where we're lacking, like yours is too stable, but you have a lot more viable political parties than we do. Right. I mean, and part of that is just the nature of the parliamentary system versus the Republican federalism that we have.
Yeah.
But it strikes me that we over here could do with a lot more. I think at least 5 or 6 more political parties we could do with, major parties that can actually have a statistical impact in elections. Doesn't mean everyone is going to get to be president, what have you. But what it means is that we want to have, there's this term people always use that I've never really liked this. So, the divisive politics of so-and-so. Politics is supposed to be divisive. That's the point. Politics is supposed to help people figure out where their issues are as distinct, as separate from other people's issues, and where those issues may intersect, right? And the point is that you want a political system that can at least represent the real divisions in society, right? Societies it is natural for societies to be divided, even in a country that's completely racially homogenous. Okay, you might have people who live on the coast, you might have people who live in the interior, you might have people who are in the logistics sector or in the farming sector or in heavy industry or in IT. They're going to have different interests. They're going to see the world in different ways. They're going to have different constructions of what the good life means to them.
Yeah.
And the whole point of politics, no matter where you live, it's supposed to be an instrument. And it's meant to be it's not a solution, it's an instrument. Okay. It's not right. It's not politics isn't the music. Politics is the violin, right? And
Yeah.
it's the thing that helps you figure out what those divisions are and figure out how to reconcile those divisions, not to make them disappear, but to reconcile them so we can live together without having to kill each other. That's all politics is. But it requires people to get up off of this attitude of where you only got this many votes. You only, those worshiping numbers, worshiping statistics. Instead of saying, well, what is, Nick Buckley, shit, Nick Buckley got 1 vote from in Manchester. I don't care. What did he have to say? Oh, that's interesting. Maybe next time he'll get 2 votes,
Yeah.
But you miss this quote from Wayne Gretzky, I believe, the hockey player in my country, said you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Yeah.
This brings me right around to well, and I'm really setting up for this big thing because again, the one of the big things I have in my notes that I want to plug is your book. Your upcoming book is called The Making of a Beggar. But I think the reason I'm harping on all these different issues is because I think they all feed in to a cultural trend that is our real enemy, and to a cultural trend, again, in your country and mine, that we have to defeat if we're really going to get out from under what's happening to us. So we talked about entitlement, victim mentality, outward looking rather than inward looking analysis. And then we were just talking about my man Keegan on YouTube, who's making fun of you for only having won a certain number of votes when you ran for mayor, as opposed to taking you to task for something you said or believed, which would at least be righteous.
Absolutely.
But he wants to worship the numbers. Yeah. And again, if you're looking at the numbers, you don't have to, it's easy. You avoid the hard work of looking at the issues. And I think,
no resolution.
Nick Buckley, I don't know about his solution, because here's the problem with that. Now you're having a righteous discussion. Oh, you only got this many votes. That's not a righteous discussion. So I'm kind of building toward this thing because this kind of takes me to another thing I want to hear you sound off about, which is that we seem to be addicted to ease. And I don't just mean physical leisure. I mean things that are mentally easy. This thing, again, Brother Keegan, who's trying to make fun of you on Twitter here, it's like measurements are easy. Okay. Assessments are hard. Right? Like I can look at a number and I can say this number that's a computer can that's so easy. Even a dumbass computer can do that. But to assess your point of view, that's hard. And I want to hear you sound off a little bit about where you see that manifesting. We talked. The first time we talked was before the COVID jump off. We've seen all these countries seemingly want to flush their economy down the toilet because they're chasing after numbers. In my city, New York, we've seen successive decades of people destroying the art of policing in favor of chasing stats and chasing numbers. I'd just like you to talk a little bit about how you how you see that trend in recent politics, this desire to go for the easy thing, you know, the measurement over the assessment, you know, the soundbite over the foundational idea.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think part of the answer lies in bureaucracy and administrators. The last time we had a real leader in the UK was Margaret Thatcher, you know, and that was the beginning of my lifetime. You may have agreed with her, you may not agree with Margaret Thatcher, but she was a leader. She was someone who had a vision. She knew where she wanted to take the country. But since then, all we've had in my country have been caretakers. It's people who've just wanted to keep the status quo, keep it ticking over, make sure the boiler's working, fix that broken window, and there's been no vision there at all. And the administrators have taken over, and all the administrators care about is counting beans. So how many arrests have you made? Fantastic. 19,000, great. But if those 19,000 arrests were for people dropping litter, well, that's not going to affect the real crime in that area, the burglaries, the muggings, the rapists. But you can say you arrested 19,000 people. So when we start looking at those sort of figures and those stats, that's where it all starts falling apart. But on paper, it looks good. And, you know, we had something in the NHS when Tony Blair became Prime Minister. He was really big in giving everybody targets to hit. And what happens as humans is you give us a target, we'll hit it. We'll do whatever we can take to hit it. Everything else will go to pot.
That's right.
We'll hit it. And he had a target of when you turned up at hospital, you would be in a bed. I can't remember the exact things now, but you'd be in a hospital bed within an hour if you needed it. And all the hospitals were hitting that target. And then an investigator from the press had a look what was going on. And what the hospitals were doing, they were getting people to sit on beds in hallways. And then they were classed as in a bed.
In a bed, right.
So when you give people targets like that, which are meaningless, you wonder why the bureaucrats will hit those targets, but it's not what was intended. And that's how we're running our countries now. It's not what anyone intends, but you can get a soundbite out of it. You can put a tweet out about it. And the vast majority of people only want to read 7 words.
Yeah.
So as long as you can get your message in 7 words, they're never going to read the article in the first place.
That's right. That's right.
And I think it was Socrates or Plato or someone like that, 2,000 years ago, Greek guy said, democracies always get the governments they deserve. Meaning you voted for this, so therefore it's your fault because you're not keeping your leaders in check enough.
That's right. You're not keeping them honest. You know, when you were talking before about having run for mayor, I thought that I was thinking it just struck me that you know people don't always get the politicians they need. They always get the politicians, or they usually get the politicians they want. You know, in these kinds of systems, you know, and but there again, just because you want something doesn't mean it's good for you.
And what do politicians always sell the public? They always sell the public, I'm going to give you more free stuff.
Yes, sir.
You want more healthcare? You want to pay less taxes? You want free school meals? You want this? Do you want that? Do you want... And they always sell you something that the next generation is going to have to pay for. They're always selling you a dream you cannot afford to buy. And because humans, we are naturally greedy, because that's a human trait, because we're greedy because 1,000 years ago, if we'd have come across a bush and the fruit was ripe, we'd have took all of it. We'd have took more than we needed. We'd take all of it because we may never find this bush again. So therefore, we're naturally prone to take as much stuff we think we need as possible. And politicians, not consciously, but subconsciously, have learned the more we promise, the more they'll vote for us. But it's going to bankrupt the West if we don't get out of this habit.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And this goes back to, speaking of the Greeks, um, this goes back to Aristotle's concept of virtue, which is the ability to govern one's passions, right?
Mm.
And we talk about democracy as if it's an answer to something, which it isn't, right? Again, it's an instrument, but just like an actual instrument, okay, you have to set up properly to use it right, to make
Mm.
it play in tune. And one of the things that you have to set up correctly, okay, is a sense of virtue, right? And to use the instrument of democracy uh, to get the least bad outcomes that you can, especially in hard times. You need a population that understands the notion of controlling its passions. Okay, I want this. I want to do this, but I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that a lot of our problem right now is that we've gotten very, partly because uh, we've lived in relative prosperity for so long and relative peace for so long,
Yeah.
and that's across the board in the West. I mean, my country, your country, continental Europe.
We've never had it so good.
Never had it so good, since the end of World War II, when everyone got flattened except for us,
Yeah.
and then everything got rebuilt, and then whoosh, it was off to the moon. We never had it so good. And there's just a lot of things we never had to think about. And we never had to really confront real scarcity as a nation. We've had it in our nation, certainly, but we haven't had to confront real scarcity as a nation. And I think that's the main problem, is that that's not a good atmosphere for practicing virtue.
Yeah.
And then, of course, if at least now, if you have a religion, if you have a religious tradition, then that's part of the purpose of a religious tradition, is that kind of, even in good times, you're always reminded, you go every Sunday, or you go every Saturday, you go to the synagogue, you go to the church, you go to the mosque, whatever, and you kind of review, if you will, these basic traditions, right? And these basic habits. You might fast for some amount of time. You might interrupt yourself to go and pray the liturgical hours or whatever, and you kind of introducing a hardship so that you remember what it's like to live in tough times. But if you throw away all of it, roughly around the same time, that's a disaster. And it seems to me that we've thrown away so much of this foundational stuff. I mean, Jesus Christ, you want to do away with the family. You want to do away with personal responsibility. You want to do away with marriage. You want to do away with religion. You want to do away with social boundaries and what have you. And you just want to pile technology on top of that as if that's some kind of answer. Then you're surprised when things don't go well. It's extraordinary.
Yeah. I mean, we're definitely missing religion.
Yes, sir.
Religion gave us a framework, a societal framework that everybody knew the rules. You may not have agreed with them, you may not have understood them, but you knew what they were. And your next door neighbor would have held you accountable for the rules your religion dictated.
Correct.
And we had societal shame, which were fostered by religion, so therefore it kept people in check. But once we've started removing religion, we left a huge hole. And what filled that hole? It was everything else. It was consumerism. It was individualism.
Right.
It was, and at the moment now, it's wokeism.
Yep.
All these things have filled the hole that religion vacated. And some religions, based on our religion, were evil. The Aztec religion killed babies.
That's right.
Our religion, Christianity did terrible things. All religions, just like, because they're created by men, and men
so
are not
they
perfect.
Fall short, exactly. So they fall short just like
So
men do.
they always fall short. But we removed our societal rules without replacing them with something just as sturdy. And that's one of our major problems.
Yes.
And then when you were talking about what politicians promise and what we want, I always break it down to need and want. I need a house. I need food. I want a Mercedes and I want a brand new iPhone. But they're two different things. So politicians should only be trying to get us what we need. They should never be providing us with what we
What
want.
you want, right?
We
Exactly.
should be responsible for what we want in life, not what we are, and what we need as well, with some help from the government, but not what we want. It's not government's responsibility to pander to all our needs, because there's no end to that well.
That's correct. And the thing is that there is an end to the amount of money you can print without crashing your economy. And that's what we're finding now, is like, if politicians, if the citizens can't govern their passion, right? And then if politicians can't govern their passion to get reelected, or as in the case of the recently departed, the soon to be lamented Boris Johnson, can't govern their desire to be liked, okay?
Yeah.
Then they're always going to just go for the easy win. And look, I mean, let's be honest. We're on the cusp of this huge inflation crisis right now. Printing money is easy. Printing money is dead easy. Just run the printing press. Actually building an economy, see, that's hard. Like, that requires and that requires you sometimes to say no to things. It's like, man, I want to build this thing. And this is the thing I'm always talking about. Because, I'm always, you've heard some of my podcasts and some of the Foundationism series with Danny Duran, some of the stuff I talk about with Seb Abakasis from Not the BBC podcast. It's like, this is where our societies can learn a lot from working class people and from people of the trades, people who actually build real things. The kind of stuff you talk about when you complain about our political establishment. It strikes me that this is what we get when we put ourselves at the mercy of people who've never had real jobs, and who never had to build anything. Because you see, when you build something, you're on the hook for it, but you also have to make choices. Like, you also have to say no to certain things. Like, if you want to build a house, you have a certain amount of money, to buy lumber and fasteners and fixtures and concrete and iron pipe and so on and so forth. And so you got to say no to certain things. Would it be nice to have oak flooring in the sunroom? Yeah, it'd be beautiful. Would it be nice to have whatever, this kind of wainscoting or this kind of thing? It would be lovely, but it's not in the cards right now. So
but you can't afford it. You
can't afford. So you know what you do? You do something else. You decide otherwise. And this is the thing that our people, it's like our politicians certainly, but we ourselves as citizens first, right? Because we have to lead. They'll follow us, right? We outnumber them. Okay. We have to set that trend of not simply giving in to the shallow, to the easy, to what we want. I did a podcast a while ago with my man Philip Riggle, at Riggle Philip, RIGGALL _ Philip on Twitter. The man is a carpenter, fine furniture maker, got his training as a shipwright, and that's his whole life, is what can I do with what I have, not with this imaginary thing that I might have. It's like, you can't build a chair with imaginary lumber, but we seem to think we can build and sustain a nation with imaginary money and imaginary values, and we're in a mess because of
have you ever heard of a term called helicopter parenting?
Yes, sir.
So for people who don't know, helicopter parenting is a new phase of parenting for the last 20 years, where normally it's mothers with only one child, where the mothers invest everything into that child and will hover around, make sure they're safe, make sure all their needs are met, go above and beyond. And what that does is that damages a child. The child never learns resilience, never learns how to solve problems themselves, doesn't understand danger, is always scared of everything because mummy always took care of it.
Yes.
But I think we've got to a stage now where we've got helicopter politicians and they hover around the populace and they're looking at trying to solve your problems. They're looking at making sure that they're keeping you safe, and they're looking, basically they want you to be their friends.
Yes.
But what the populace and what the general public need is, we need leadership, and we need civil servants who are putting us first, our long-term future first. But what politicians tend to do is always think about a 4-year cycle. I'm up for election in 4 years. I need, whatever I'm going to do, it needs to have a benefit in 4 years. And for someone who's been fixing and trying to fix societies and communities for over 2 decades, you can do nothing in 4 years. All you do is plant some seeds. I've had when I worked for the local government, I had politicians say to me, Nick, we've got a problem of burglary, we've got a problem of antisocial behaviour. I'm up for election in 6 months' time. What can you do? And I'd go, well, with no extra money, there's nothing we can do. He went, I don't care what you can do. I want you to make it look like something's been done.
Yes.
I know nothing can be done, but make it look like something's been done. And so we would spend the next 6 months achieving nothing apart from some PR. And that is the state of our politics in the UK. It's short-termism with career politicians.
That's right. That's right. You know, this, as you're talking about this, I'm thinking about, I'm thinking about the actual farmers that I have in my circle. And the last day, the last podcast I did with Danny, with Danny Duran on the Infinite Jigsaw was we talked about this the 10th precept of Foundationist Manifesto: cultivate the future.
Yep.
And it seems to me that that's the thing that's missing, right? Is the idea to think on something, as you say, a time scale other than just the next 4 years. And I've heard you talk about, you've talked to me about this before.
Yep.
You've talked to me about this specifically. You mentioned the notion of thinking, listen, this problem that we're trying to fix is a real problem. And I'm going to be honest with you, as a guy who's running for mayor, we're not going to solve this problem in a year. We're not going to solve it in 4. You know, this may be a 10-year problem we have to solve. And, you know, it strikes me that, like, the time scales that people like farmers, for example, think on, right? That's how can I say? That's an example of the mental and the spiritual practice that we need if we're going to really get ourselves together as a civilization.
Yeah, farmers understand the flow of nature.
That's right.
A farmer can sit there on his tractor screaming at the wheat to grow quicker. And I can guarantee that wheat will not grow quicker.
It will not. You can't bribe it. You can't control it.
He has to bend to the will of nature.
That's correct.
And that's what we don't do anymore. We don't bend to the will of common sense and practicality. We will sit on our tractor and we will scream that burglaries are going down. We will scream that we want higher education. And it's like, scream all you want. It doesn't achieve anything.
That's correct. Or as we also do, and now we're coming up to my main thing, which is talking about your book. We can scream at it, or the way politicians like to scream at it is they like to throw money at it.
Oh yeah.
Right. And so it's like, and this goes directly to the heart of everything that I've been complaining about and you've been complaining about, which is that there are certain kinds of problems that, yes, money can be a useful instrument, but you will not solve the problem by throwing money. You have to. So in other words, just as you just mentioned, farmers being attuned to the flow of nature, I feel like we have a political culture that is not attuned to the flow, to the ebb and the flow and the shape of human nature.
Yeah.
And as a result, they want to throw money at things. And one of the things that does, again, and there are some problems, I will admit, that throwing money at can help you with, but they tend to be very well-defined problems. You know, like I want to launch a rocket. Okay. You know, I want to build a fighter aircraft. Okay, it's got some engineering specifications. Okay, do that. Wonderful. But like solving poverty getting to the heart of someone's gambling problem,
Yeah.
figuring out how to bring the best out of someone so they can get up out of the thing they're in and start to actually, be a productive citizen. Man, that's hard. And so what we've created, whether we wanted to or not, whether we meant to or not, was a culture, a political culture now, where citizens just say, well, I need you to give me this so that I can. And now finally we're at the kind of what I feel like the center point of this interview, that you have an upcoming book.
Yeah.
It's called The Making of a Beggar. It seems to me that what Lily, you've told me about that book, that you've got that element of our political culture dead in your gun sights. Talk about what inspired that book and what you hope people can take from that book when it comes out and hopefully it sells a lot of copies.
So it comes out a week on Saturday. You can pre-order it now on Amazon and other book retailers. The book came out of me working with the homeless in Manchester for the last 15 years. It's a very tricky topic, homelessness, especially rough sleeping on the street outside. And the more I worked on this topic, the more I realized the people I was working with, not only were they broken mentally, but they had something called learned helplessness, where they were incapable of solving their own problems because all the way through their life, the state or other agencies had always stepped in and solved their problems for them or taken care of them. And that over a lifetime left these people with no ability to solve their own problems or take actions or positive actions themselves. They became useless because they were taught to be useless. And that sort of book floated in my head for a long time. And then I started and then COVID happened. And then I started looking around the UK and I saw it happening to more and more people, but in a different way. We had a scheme. So the government closed down all the businesses in the UK and then said, but we're going to fund those businesses and fund all those wages. And all of a sudden, all people who'd worked hard all their lives were sat in the gardens for almost a year and a half and doing nothing, and then didn't want to go back to work. And then were complaining they had no money. And I'm saying to myself, but you accepted state handouts. You got 80% of your wage just to do nothing. And I realised then that the government was turning more and more people into beggars off the state. So then I started writing the book and I started looking into different things. So I started looking into not only rough sleeping, but I started looking into politics. And I realised politics is the game of the giver and the taker. And those roles swap over depending what part of the election cycle we're at. So during elections, the politicians are the beggars. They're begging for votes. And they're begging and they're promising what they'll do for people. And, I'll do anything. Please put some votes in my paper cup. But then after the election, the public then become beggars because we're begging politicians to do things for us. So the roles are always swapping around. And then, I looked at our welfare system and some of the mistakes we've made. I mean, you talked about giving money before. If giving money solved problems, believe me, the UK should have no problems.
It'd be a paradise.
Because we've given that much money to everybody about everything. But we have more problems now than we did before. Because no sooner do we solve child poverty than all the charities get together and redefine what child poverty is. So then we've got child poverty again. So now we need more money to solve this new child poverty. And at the moment in the UK, poverty is defined something along the lines of it's something like 60% of the average wage. You can't afford a foreign holiday. You don't have a mobile phone. That's the definition of poverty in the UK. And it's like, that isn't real poverty. So we do it. And then you look at some of our social policies. The biggest mistake we ever did was try to help single mothers. So trying to help them wasn't the problem. Our solution was the problem. So we looked at single mothers in the 60s and 70s and we said, That's a shame. They've got no money. They're struggling. Let's give them more money. So what did that do? That made being a single mother more appealing. So more people became single mothers. So what did that do to the men? Men then said, oh, I've got my girlfriend pregnant who I don't want to be with anymore. That's okay. I can walk away. The state will look after her now and my kid. So all we did was we kept removing people's personal responsibility. We removed the mother's responsibility by not picking decent, hardworking, secure men to sleep with. And we removed the personal responsibility from some men by allowing them to walk away and abandon their women and their children. And then we had an explosion in single parents. So, here's a great example of how unintended consequences can affect us all. There was a documentary on TV last year about the Afghanistan war. And they were talking to a British captain who was commanded a division in the Helmand province. And he was talking about how little the army understood the Afghans. And he was saying every couple of months they would march through this little village in the middle of nowhere. And they decided part of the hearts and minds approach, they would build a water well in the middle of the village. Surely the people will love them for that. It saves all the women trekking a mile every day to collect water from the local river. So they built a stream, a well. And then a month later, they came past again. It was broken. So they fixed it. A month later, came past again. It was broken again. And they realised this time it was sabotage. Someone was breaking the well. So they fixed it again, came back again, broken again. So he set his men to fix it again. And he said he was thinking about, is it the Taliban? But he kept thinking to himself, if it was the Taliban, they'd get all the villages out, show them, and they'd blow it up. But explode. They would have just cut the ropes and the wires. So he went, as his men were fixing the well for the 5th time, he had to walk around the village with an interpreter. And 5 women stopped him. And one of them was basically shouting at him in whatever the language is. Mm-hmm. And the interpreter said, she's saying, why do you keep fixing that well? The women here don't want that well. We keep breaking it and you keep fixing it. Please go away and don't come back to this village and fix it. And this captain said, I was absolutely shocked. So I said to the interpreter, why? I thought you wanted it. I'm saving you going down to the stream every day. So the woman replied to him, we want to go to the stream. We're locked in our houses all the time. The only time the women get out of their houses and can socialise is when we spend several hours every morning walking to the stream, collecting water and walking back. When the well's working, we see nobody, we speak to nobody, we're locked in our houses. And that's when he realised, what the hell are we doing in this country? We don't know. We don't understand these people. We think they want what we want. We have no concept. And our goodwill is actually harming the people we think we're helping. So he went back to the well and he said to his sergeant, make sure that well never works again. And he said, and he said to the chief of the village, there's some parts broken. I'm going to order them from England. It'll take several months. And a year later, he still kept going through the village. And in the end, the chief of the village stopped asking him and said, your government are just as incompetent as our government. We never get the right part. So that's what he learned from his tour in Afghanistan. And I know that's, a little bit of an extreme topic, story, but that's what we're doing in the UK and America with our social problems and our solutions. We're just making things worse because we don't understand what the real problem is and what those people want. Because the educated middle class, they wouldn't dream of speaking to the poor people about what they really want in their lives and what would really improve their lives. What the middle class, all they do is, we know what you want, you poor, ignorant, racist fools. We're going to give you what we think you want to have a better life, a bit more like our life. They never speak to the people and find out what will improve their lives. Because even if what they say you don't agree with, do you know what, pal? It's got nothing to do with us. people should be free to make the choices and live the lives they want, as long as they're not harming other people. We should not impose our values, our culture, our way of life on anybody, especially in our own countries, because we
Well,
don't know anything better than those people know. They
well,
just have
that's
a
right.
different life.
Well, and also, I mean, that was beautifully put, and that's exactly. I mean, you really got to the heart of several of the things I'm always complaining about. Um,
Mm.
from a foundationist standpoint, you talk about a failure to listen closely. You
Yes.
know what I'm saying? And that's the very second point in our manifestation. Excuse me,
Mm.
the very second point in our manifesto. Listen closely for a reason, because again, it's about close listening. It's not about hearing a sound bite, hearing a fragment of this or a piece of that, or listening to yourself and your own flights of fancy.
Yeah.
It's about actually looking at a situation and then getting in there and figure, okay, what's really happening in here? And it's so funny you talk about Afghanistan, and you talk about this was a UK officer, correct, who was serving in Afghanistan in
Yep.
this
Yep.
story.
British officer.
So it's what struck me about that is that foreign policy, I guess what's fashionable to call nation building is something that the UK actually used to be good at. I mean,
Yes.
call it what you want, say what you want about imperialism. We could talk about all that, but I'm just saying that there was a time where when the British wanted to go somewhere and set up shop, they would go and they would just drop people in there and say, okay, just figure out what's going on here. And you guys were famous for that. You just like get on the ground and be like, okay, how do things work up in here? Who's the man in this village? How do you get things done here?
The
Okay.
difference was those days we were nation building. What we do now is culture building.
It's culture building. And the thing, right, exactly. And the thing is, you can't build a culture. You can grow a culture,
Yep.
but you can't build a culture. You know what I'm saying? You could maybe, if you're doing a concrete pour or if you're doing a plumbing job, you could maybe ship more plumbing supplies and ship more Portland cement and get double up your work shifts, okay, and maybe get the thing done faster. But again, to your earlier point, you can't do that with five farmers can't make one wheat crop coming in a fifth of the time. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
You see?
Yeah.
So again, we come back to this thing of a political class that first of all, doesn't know how to pay attention to the right things, right? And that doesn't know how to listen, and because why? Because they've never had to have those skills. We have all these people. I mean, I'm thinking about the current kind of leadership contest in your country for the Tory party. It's like, God bless these people. Most have never had a real job in their lives.
Yep.
They've never had to listen closely to people. They've never had to go into a situation and really pay close attention to every little thing and figure out and then be honest about outcomes. Who has to be honest about outcomes? Car mechanics.
Yeah.
because guess what? The outcome is what it is. Plumbers, like your outcomes are either you fixed the leak or you didn't. That's it. Either my car starts now correctly or it doesn't start now correct. That's it. There's no recontextualizing and, well, what's the definition of a car starting correctly today? That's different from your old, antiquated, white privilege definition of how a car is supposed to work from 10 years ago. So even though your car is not starting, my program is a success. No, none of that. Like it is or it isn't. Okay.
But again, I think that's our fault as voters.
Yes, it is.
Because politicians react to us. And I think if we ask this question to politicians, I think some would say to us, of course, Nick, I know what we should be doing. But I know if I say that, the voters don't care.
Yes,
what
sir.
the voters want me to say is what makes them happy today and tomorrow.
Yes.
Because by next week, they've forgotten what I've said. So the message I need to give to them is what they want to hear now, because they're going to vote for me next year.
Yes, sir.
And it's because I think we've had it far too good for far too long.
Yeah.
That that's why we have apathy in our general elections and voting here, because our local elections, you're looking at 20% turnout, and in general elections you're looking at 65%.
Yes.
So the rest of the people aren't voting. Why? Because they don't care. And why don't they care? Because they all think all politicians are bad each other. Why do they think that? Because they've got it too good. And because there's no more hardship anymore now. Because believe me, if your tummy was hungry every night and an election was coming up, that would influence how you vote.
Yeah.
Was your hungry stomach, or your child walking around in rags, that would help you make a decision where you were going to vote. But when all you're thinking about is, do I want a new iPhone? Do I want this? Do I want that? It's, well, politicians are not going to get me any of those things because I've got everything I need. Then it just becomes a pointless exercise.
Yes.
And hence why people don't vote. But
Yeah.
that's why we're in a situation we're in now, because democracies have a reflection of the people, and it's our fault. We need to stop blaming politicians, because that's just a cop out. That's looking to blame someone for the state we're in. Politicians are voted in by us, and they do what we instruct them to do. We might not think they do, but they do. And the best examples of that is in the UK, we have politicians spending our tax money on banning plastic straws and saving elephants in Africa.
Yes.
And why are they wasting our money and their time on this? It's because that's what the general public care about, and have told them that's what they care about. Now, has the general public told these politicians we care about our girls being gang raped? No, they haven't. And that's why no one's doing anything about it. So until we start telling our politicians what we want and voting them out for not doing what we want, then the only people to blame are ourselves.
Now, the only place I'm mostly with you there, the only place I disagree is that when I hear someone say vote, what I think is that as citizens, we need to cast our whole vote, which does not just mean casting a ballot. That is to say, the Dutch farmer, because there's an argument and a compelling one that our politicians are not necessarily only following quote unquote democratic imperatives. And I don't want to hear any stuff in my Twitter feed about how, well, you don't understand what a democracy really is. Yes, I get it. I get it. Yes, UK is a constitutional monarchy. The US is a republic. I get it. But just using the term loosely, it's legitimate to point out that many of our politicians are following imperatives that don't have anything to do with the numbers of votes cast. They have to do with behind the scenes money engines. They have to do with high finance. They have to do with people's financial holdings. They have to do with supranational institutions. In the UK, you guys recently voted to leave the European Union, which is an organization that started out as like a commerce and trade organization and got way too big for its britches.
Yeah.
And part of the reason for all these initiatives, and the WHO is doing this, and the world this and the world that, is precisely because it's as a mechanism for politicians, domestic politicians, to avoid responsibility, the primary responsibility to their electorates. They could say, well, don't take it up with me, even though I'm your member for parliament, so and so, or I'm the minister for so and so. You have to take that up with the European Council, or the Council of Europe, or the Council of somebody in Brussels. So I like the idea of casting one's whole vote, not just casting a ballot. Sometimes voting might mean, sometimes voting means downing tools and walking away from the assembly line. Sometimes that's what voting means. Those Dutch farmers in the Netherlands, I'm sure if you ask them, none of them voted for their farms to be taken away behind some bullshit, cock and bull story about nitrogen. Okay, that's a land grab, and that's being orchestrated partly inside their nation and partly outside it. But they can still cast a vote by jumping in their tractors and driving to the Capitol and saying, hey, listen, we're going to make a mess up in here until you start to listen. And that's no guarantee of success, but it's the same thing. This goes back. I'm going back again to this, the concept of this book, which is that you take yourself out of the role of a beggar. You know, different people listening to this podcast are going to have different ideas about how exactly citizens begin to assert control again. But the one thing I think everyone with sense is going to agree on is you have to take yourself out of the role of someone who is merely petitioning for something or asking for something. It's like you have to stop asking and start telling. And again, that can take a lot of different forms. The UK was the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. And in a lot of ways, it was also the birth of what we think about as the modern labor movement. And it seems to me that we've developed a very silly and boring and historically blind attitude toward organized labor, as if there's some other way for large numbers of workers to make their presence felt in the halls of power. But whether you're in a recognized union, or whether you just get together with some guys from the factory or the plant or whatever, you get a mailing list together, or you get whatever it is, it's like I think you would agree that there's always ways for us to make our presence felt, and those ways don't only manifest themselves when there is an election. Because the mechanism of our civilization depends on us. And you and I talked about this in our last conversation, which we didn't tape, which was that all these people, whether it's our political classes at home, or whether it's these multinational or supranational organizations like the WEF, these people, one, there's not that many of them, and they're not that bright, and they have no skill sets. They're not doing the farming. They're not paving the roads. They're not running the electrical. They're not pouring the concrete. They're not doing any of that stuff. And if we decide we're going to stop doing that, if we decide we're going to create shortages, then things are going to change up.
Yeah. I mean, there isn't a government on earth at the moment who is scared of an individual.
That's right.
But every government on earth is afraid of what's the word I'm looking for? A group of individuals who have organized themselves.
Yes.
Because that's where the power of the individual comes from. It's in organizations such as trade unions, when they're not corrupted and far left lunatic asylums, which has happened in the UK with some of the big ones. But we're looking at what's happened in the UK with the cooperative movement. When people get together and organize, governments quake because you can't stop the people once they've organized. But it's about getting those people to see themselves more than just an individual. They've got to see themselves as a community. They've got to see themselves not only today, but not only as someone tomorrow, but someone in 10 years' time. Because what you do today might not improve your life until 10 years from now. It might never improve your life. It might improve your child's life, though.
That's right.
So it's about trying to see the timeline of doing something now, so someone, you or someone else in your family, can get the benefit down the line. But what's happened to our societies is we've all become too comfortable, and we've given away all our personal responsibility, and we've given away all our protection mechanisms to the state. And we say to the state, do it all for us and let me be just an individual. And what that makes is unhappy people. In the UK, it's something like 25% of all women in the UK are on antidepressants. So feminism is not really helping women in the UK because a quarter of them are depressed. And I give this little example in my book. And I talk about a shepherd and his sheep, a farmer and his sheep. And those sheep feel really special because the farmer looks after them. He takes them to different fields with new green grass. He buys hay for them and other feed. He has a vet come down every month to check them all out. He makes sure the wolves and the foxes don't go anywhere near them. And all these sheep are as happy as Larry. They're all really happy, and they think that farmer is a bit like a god. He looks after us, he's so clever. But what they don't realise is one day that farmer will turn up with a stun gun and a butchering knife. Because what they think the farmer is isn't what he really is. He's got his own agenda. It just happens to fit in with the sheep's agenda for a certain amount of time. What those sheep would have been better off doing was being free, was having a harder life on the moors by themselves, scavenging for heather and bits of grass and living free. There would have been a tougher life. It would have been a more challenging life. It would have been a healthier life. And they would have been in charge of when their death. At the moment, they're just waiting to die at the hands of the farmer. And that's what we need to be careful of across the West, is we're not so complacent. We've given so much power to other organisations, the government, and we need to be careful that one day they don't turn up with a stun gun and a butchering knife for us.
That's right. that is.
And for people who think that will never happen, well, don't you think the people in 1930s Germany thought it wouldn't happen? Don't you think the people in the 70s Cambodia, don't you think they never thought it would happen? 1990s Rwanda, don't you think the Hutus and the other guys, don't you think they didn't think it was going to happen?
That's right.
You know,
right.
we just, history repeats itself.
Well, that's
we
right.
need to be careful.
Yeah, I mean, Europe. I mean, Europe prides itself on being a very modern place, but Europe is very tribal, and it's actually the most contested, the most fought over ground on earth. I mean, there used to be a country called Yugoslavia in Europe. What happened to that country?
Yeah.
In living memory,
fell
right?
apart, and they committed atrocities and genocide between each other. And that was, what was that? That was 25 years ago.
Yeah, that's right. That
was it. Not 125 years ago. I remember watching it on TV.
Yeah.
I remember seeing the concentration camps, people skin and bone.
Yeah.
I remember the UN digging up the mass graves of slaughtered villages. This is Europe 25 years ago. Look what's happening in Ukraine at the moment. We are animals. All you've got to do to turn me and you violent, and me and you, Mike, we're not violent people, but to turn me and you violent, all we have to do, pardon me, is miss 3 consecutive meals, and then we will kill our neighbor for food.
I mean, what's funny about this is I'm just about with you there. I would say that you've got to turn off. I mean, what you have to do is to do that while you've turned off all the other protections. I mean, I think we have we certainly do have an animal nature, but we've evolved, or we've built up, or you can say we have in us, that we've cultivated a protection against the animal nature. Like we have a higher nature, okay, a spirit nature, and that spirit nature is supposed to be in charge of the beast nature, not the other way around, right? So you know what I'm saying?
That's only when things are going our way.
Well, I would say there I would disagree. I would say that people in bad situations have behaved badly or well toward each other, depending. In other words,
that's true.
Right? So poverty is not enough enough of a reason for crime. It has to be, poverty plus the destruction of the family plus low social capital, right? And then if you've thrown away all those safeguards that people have internally that keep them in check, that keep them acting right, if you throw that away and then they start to miss meals, you're in a lot of trouble. So this go on. I'm sorry.
If you look at the concentration camps in the Second World War, some of the Jews in those camps committed some atrocities themselves. But yet, at the same time, there was Jews in those camps who did the most wonderful things for other people in those camps, who gave away their food and gave away their shoes and helped people survive. But yet, other people in those camps were all about themselves. I'm not saying there's right or wrong in this, because I have no concept of what it's like to be in a concentration camp, and it would be very foolish of me to start judging anybody in that situation. But in those dire situations, there's people with complete opposite views and complete opposite ways of living and dying.
This is when I think about thinking about me being a black guy and the history of my country with chattel slavery. I think about the fact that there were very many, a lot more slave revolts than people usually think of. People know about Nat Turner. Not that many people know about Denmark VC. Not that many people know about the Dixon slave revolt, which was an interracial slave revolt, by the way. But same thing. Right. There were people who were down to meet at midnight and get it on and get out. And there were black slaves who would sell out people who they heard planning a revolt. Yeah. Okay. So this is human
nature.
This is human nature. And the thing is that all we really have to kind of counteract, our lower selves is the cultivation of the higher self. And this I want to round this out, because this has been an amazing talk, and you've been so generous with your time. And I want to bring this back to, what you're trying to get across, because in this book that you've got coming up, The Making of a Beggar, I've put a link to it on my Twitter feed. Is what you're talking about, it strikes me, is not, in other words, when the book isn't called The Making of a Poor Person. That is, you're not talking about a material. When you make someone into a beggar, it seems to me you're not talking about a material change in their circumstance. You're talking about a change in their mindset, a spiritual change.
I'm talking about people who expect to live their lives on the hard work of somebody else.
Yes, sir.
And do not take the responsibility themselves for their own lives, and will blame their mishaps always on someone else. It's never their fault.
It's many of the people in my circle, my online circle, are from the UK. And I've got many people, maybe from Ireland, or people who have Irish roots. And, when the Irish came to my country in large numbers, and specifically to my city, to New York, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they were fleeing the potato famine. And at that time, there were the dregs of New York society.
Yeah,
people thought they were unemployable. Even places that would have hired black guys like me didn't want any Irish around. And all the respectable people had all their scientific theories about why the Irish weren't good. Their heads are the wrong size, their heads are the wrong shape. They're just genetically worse. They're this and that, whatever. I don't know if the IQ test had been invented yet, but they probably would have tried that out too.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that internally what happened was, mainly with the Irish in New York, is that they had a spiritual revolution. It was mainly headed by a man named an Irish priest named Father Dagger John Hughes. And they rejected crass materialism. They rejected being beggars. Specifically, Father Hughes called it soupery, just accepting soup and handouts from the local progressive organization or from Tammany Hall or whoever. They got themselves together spiritually first. And within a few generations, all the best schools in New York City were run by Irish Catholics. And within a few generations more, they had a guy in the White House. So I think that this book that you're coming out with is really a book whose time has come, whose time is here. And I'm just delighted to be able to, shed some light on it and really get people thinking about this stuff. What would you want to leave people? Well, first of all, before anything else, how can people find out more about you, about what you're working on, about Mancunian Way, the whole package?
So follow me on social media. I'm on lots and lots of different versions of apps. So I've got the same username, which is Nick Buckley, MBE, all one word. So I'm really active on Twitter, bit of Facebook, bit of Instagram, Getter, LinkedIn. So you'll find me in most of the usual places. Follow me on there. The charity itself, look for the charity on the same sort of platforms. You'll find the charity on there. I'm not heavily involved in the charity anymore now. I've stepped back from the charity a little bit. And I think what I'd like to leave people with really is this simple choice. Your life isn't exactly what you want it to be, because do you know what? No life is. And it doesn't matter how bad your life is at the moment. The choice is, do you want to be in charge of your life, or do you want the state to be in charge of your life? Because if you're waiting for the state to get around to improving your life, you're going to be waiting a hell of a long time. I would rather be poor, disheveled, and unhappy, but know it's my life to change, because knowing that gives me all the power in the world to do what I want to do. But if I've got to wait for someone else to get round to me, then that feels like one of the 7 rings of hell.
Nick Buckley, it's been such a pleasure to get back in touch with you and to chop it up with you about culture and politics. I actually still have questions that I haven't even covered that are in my notes that people suggest.
It always goes too quick.
It always goes too quick, but
yeah.
we're going to do another one of these soon. We won't leave it so long next time, and I'm going to take up some more of this stuff, because we got a lot of interesting kind of day-to-day cultural stuff, hot debates that you and I haven't really sounded off together on. So we'll be back again soon. But thank you so much, brother. I really appreciate you taking the time.
No problem. And if you've got any listeners who've got their own podcasts and you'd like me as a guest, just get in contact. I'm always happy to have a chat with people who've got good questions to ask. And it's always a pleasure chatting to you, Mike.
Hey, same here, brother. All right, man. Take care. See you next time.
Yep. See you soon.
All right.